Elena.
David.
Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm sorry, I don't think we've met.
Marlena. I was at Lynn's interview the other night. You did a really good
Oh,
job.
I'm sorry, right, yes.
I'm
But
just
you were
nodding.
wearing a hat or something? What were you wearing?
My mask, probably.
I don't remember. But yes, we met. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
And thank you for saying I did a good job. I
You
hope
did a
so
great
because
job. That was a really good interview. I've always wanted to listen to Lynn chat about her art like that.
I
She
know.
never does.
She never does, yeah. I think it was recorded and I'm hoping people watch it because it was like really a great opportunity to get into her head a little bit about
the
the
that's
process.
not easy. Creating covers is not easy.
Do you have any specific things you want to talk about with short stories? Like anything you want me to hit?
I know people are always asking about where to find publishers for short stories.
Okay, we'll talk about
And
that.
that's a good thing. And how to determine a good publisher from a not good publisher. So that's a good option.
David, is there anything specific you think we should hit about short stories?
Something about the length.
The length?
No, no.
Oh, I thought you were really serious, like really
It's a
stay
dangerous
within the
area.
length. It should be this and this. But maybe what you're looking for in an anthology. That's
Yeah.
something specific you
Yeah.
could talk about.
This is my third panel today, so I'm just in panel mode.
Yep. So backloaded.
Oh yeah. I had like one yesterday. I had three back to back today and one. It's my last one, thankfully.
That's good.
What about you? Did you do that pretty well?
Yeah, I had 3 yesterday, but they were kind of spread out,
Okay, that's
and
good.
I had one on Friday and one today. So,
That's not bad.
no.
I haven't said hi to you. Hi, David. How you doing?
All right, how are you?
I sneak in. Nobody's used to seeing me in Charlotte. Boom!
Like they didn't hear me cross state lines.
I exist across the border, right?
Yeah, I didn't know they let you leave the state. It's more like it.
They don't like it, but I got the anklet off last week.
Right.
It's all good. They made sure I've had my meds. I do have to report to somebody every 6 hours. My God. Just let them know nobody's dead. But I wouldn't tell them if they were. So
Right, yeah, really.
I don't know
Yes.
what the point was. Y'all have a good one.
Yeah, see you later.
I chatted with her for like an hour Friday. I had bitter. I'm from Atlanta and I had bitter. And I was like, and I friend her and she's like, I'm already friends with some of my author friends already. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
That's how that goes. I was in the cryptid panel earlier this morning. It was good. It was really fun. But of course it was.
Yeah. You had a good weekend?
Yeah, it's been good. It's been busy too.
Uh-huh.
It's just, running.
Did you do this con a lot?
This is our first time coming to this one.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, This is our first time coming to North Carolina for a con, so we've got a lot of friends who come here all the time already. So it's kind of nice.
Did you Jordan?
Yeah, I was at Jordan. I think this was my second year doing Jordan because we were there last year. But yeah, we've done that a couple of times. Multiverse is one we go to a lot too. That's in October.
Who else is on our panel? I don't think it's just 3.
No, Jason's on it.
Okay, I'll move it over so if he
Like,
comes
I
in a
can look
little.
it up.
No, I'll just move over so if he comes in, it'll be easier for him to.
And there's one more person on it.
Nicole's supposed to be on this one.
Oh,
She might be busy.
Hi.
Hi there.
Is there anything specific you came to learn today?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm writing a short story right now. And school is the big thing.
Okay,
I've got
like how do you see that? And
Right.
another person asked about structure, like
Doing too
language.
much or doing too
Yeah.
little, that sort of thing. Yep.
Yeah, because I realized I was trying to fit all this work of ideas into
That's
Such a good
lots of
point.
words.
Is there anything you came to learn today specific? Like you have like a specific thought or a question?
My issue with short stories is pretty much getting the client down to understand the short range as opposed to sprawling into a novella or novel.
Okay.
So
All right.
basically constraint.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sure.
It's very nice of you to go around and ask
Very
people.
real. That was really good.
Yeah, that's a very good one.
Something like that.
These are
It's really for them.
Yeah.
So my questions are irrelevant.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so maybe I should stick with that big word.
It's that Sunday morning after a long con.
Happy face, really?
Yeah, because it's
Because you're such
Sunday
a
morning.
cheery guy.
I am.
Yeah, I've been Jason Gilbert and Ari Lehman, so it's got quotation points. So,
We got it covered.
yeah, that,
Yeah.
I think that counts as front.
Yeah, if that had been me behind the hockey mask, it would have had a big smile. So
I wouldn't be able to sneak up on any one of the lists that keep updating with the hockey mask result.
oh yeah, speak in here.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Seriously?
It's a Sunday, yeah.
I get it, but like we gotta try.
Morning misery.
Exactly. It rises, like the sun rises. So I am JD Blackrose. My name is Joelle Rises, but I write under JD Blackrose. Is that Nicole? Yes. Nicole is here. Right down there.
This is a short story time.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is, and you are on it.
Welcome.
We were waiting for you. That was hilarious. That was the only you could say that. So I'm JD Blackrose. I am sharing a table with my partner here, David Coe. We're literally right on the other side of that wall, right there. So
We have a
you-
lot of books that we still have to
We
take
have a
home.
lot
so
of
Please
books.
come by.
Please come by. Jason, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Jason Graves. I write stuff. And 8 years ago, I made the crazy decision to found Perspective Press and then publish stuff. So, and I actually published a few things from JD here. So
That's true.
yeah,
That's true.
some short stories, topically enough.
And me.
He's not done. You keep on saying David.
No, I thought-
He's still talking.
Short stories, topically enough. I'm sorry, I did not mean to cut you off.
That's fine.
No.
It's all good.
You done?
Absolutely.
Okay. You done?
Go.
Hi, I'm David Vico. I also write as D.B. Jackson. I write fantasy, epic fantasy, urban fantasy, contemporary fantasy, historical fantasy, media tie-ins, supernatural thrillers. I've been doing this a long time. Most relevant for this panel, I am also an anthology editor. I've done 5 short story anthologies over the last 5 years for Zombies Need Brains, which is a press with a funny name, but it turns out some really, really excellent anthologies. We do them through Kickstarter. We pay professional rates, and we do usually 3 or 4 anthologies a year. And I've been in a bunch of them, and as I say, I've edited for the last 5 years.
Come on in. Don't be embarrassed. Welcome, welcome. We're wait, someone behind you. You're in the writing short stories one. Just to make sure everyone's in the right place.
This is the shuttle to Midway. Are you on the right lane?
My name is Marlena Frank. I write young adult fantasy and horror. I write everything from standalone novels, book series, short stories, novellas. I tend to write a lot of horror short stories. I think that genre really lends itself well to short stories. So yeah.
All right. I am also, I'm late. No, I'm just kidding. My name is Nicole Gibbons-Kurtz, I am the owner and publisher of Mocha Memoirs Press. We've been doing it for 13 years. And our mission is to amplify marginalized voices in speculative fiction. We do publish, I've seen a number of anthologies, but I'm also a writer. And so I am in the upcoming Solar Flare anthology, which is published by Zombie Needs Brains. And I also have written short stories for Jason as well, in addition to Bane, Apex, and a bunch of other Fire and a bunch of other publications.
Okay. I'm so happy we have so many people. It makes me excited.
I know.
I know.
And my first panel at 9:30 was really good too. So
It's great. So for those who came in maybe a little bit later, I spent some time going through the audience and asking, like, what do you want to know? So there were some common themes. So I want to start, I'm sort of trying to order them in the way that makes sense. One of them, one of sort of the topics that I heard is like, how do you structure a short story? What's the appropriate length? How do you structure it? How do you not let it get away from you so that it starts to branch off in a million different octopus directions? There's a lot of focus needed with a short story. And I think that was one of sort of the top questions that came out. So I thought maybe Nicole, you would start.
Sure.
Okay.
Planning helps to keep your story from wandering. And if it does, it's really not the end of the world because you can always fix that and edit. But there's 2 things that I try to do in writing a short story, and I suggest others do as well.
Hi, welcome. Come on in.
and if you don't fix it in edits, your editor will.
Right. One of the things I try to do is I'm much more of a pantser than a planner, unless it's short stories. I don't have a lot of characters. I keep it very focused on a small group of people, right? I can't do an ensemble because what inevitably happens is you don't have enough word count to
For your information,
make.
the other doors.
Excuse us.
Yeah, just come on in. It's okay. Just join us.
Right. So I try to keep a finite group of characters, right? A small group of characters. You don't have enough word count to make full round characters of an ensemble cast. In most instances. And then 2, I try to have one source of conflict. Because again, you may not have the word allotment to fully develop multiple conflicts, both external or internal. So I try to determine those things up front to make sure that I can stay tightly focused on the story that I want to tell.
Yeah, and I think streamlining it, like you were saying, Nicole, keeping your characters limited, keeping your conflict limited really helps to kind of focus in on the specific plot line and the story that you're going in on. I'm more of a pantser when it comes to short stories, and you kind of get a feel when you write enough short stories of how long it should be. Some anthologies that I'm invited to be on are more like 10K short stories, and some of them are like 3K. And then you have flash fiction, which is like less than 1,000. So I'm really brutal when it comes to editing. I take a chainsaw to my work, especially when I'm needing to cut down words or make it even more succinct. But I also use story beats because I'm more of a pantser. I think of, okay, here's like 3 story beats in my short piece that I'm putting together, and I want to make sure I hit each of those. So when I'm pantsing and I'm letting the characters kind of tell me where they're going, that's what I keep in mind.
Can you explain what story beats are?
So I might be like, okay, these 3 things need to happen, and they might be, I can touch on them, or I have an idea of where the ending might be, and I need to get my characters there, and what kind of issues do they go through just trying to get to that end piece, but keeping it focused on that particular line. So a story beat might be, okay, we have a morning scene. Okay, we have a scene where they're, encountering this person. And then we have like the final scene where I have in my head. And the character may have some other wanderings, but I know I'm going to hit my story beat around the middle of that story. So just kind of, it's like a loose outline. It's not a full outline because I struggle with full outlines.
That's why we're pants.
Yes.
I think Nicole and Marlena have covered a lot of the things that I would have said, particularly about limiting the number of characters, limiting the number of point of view characters.
Yep.
If I'm writing a short story, and I've published a lot of them, I usually try to keep it to 1, maybe 2 point of view characters. If I'm editing and reading for Slush for one of the anthologies, the moment I see 3 or 4 point of view switches in the course of the story, I'm starting to lose interest as an editor because the story is losing focus. I also think when we write novels, we allow ourselves to meander a little bit more. We linger over descriptions and linger over conversations, and that's lovely. And it's one of the reasons I love writing novels. You can't do that in a short story because either you're trying to make your point in 5,000 words or 7,500 words or even 10,000 words.
Yeah.
That's not a lot of room. And if you're writing flash fiction, or if the word limit is 3,000, boy, you really got to get to the point.
Yes.
Yeah. Jason, why don't you talk about what you're looking for when you're looking for a short story? What is the structure you're trying to find?
Well, I know I'll talk about writing perspective first because that informs my reading and especially my editorial. When I'm writing, I try to focus on one scene and definitely one point of view character, maybe 2, but usually 1. The whole beauty of a short story is that you're not developing a story per se. What you're doing is you're taking a scene and you're telling that scene. And that's how it makes a short story work. From my perspective, I may have some differences down here, but that's my goal when I'm writing, and my goal when I'm reading is I want to see something that begins, arcs, and ends with it without lots of travel or wandering or scene changes.
I have had the opportunity to read Slush for a couple local things and local to where I live. And it was so eye-opening. And I will tell you the most common thing I saw as a problem, and I'd love you guys to comment on this, is that the stories didn't end.
Yes.
They just stopped. They don't end. They just stop.
A lot of people, when they're writing something that they think is a short story, what they end up developing is more like the first chapter of a novel or a chapter of a novel, maybe not the first one. But yeah, it's exactly what Joelle is saying. Is you really have to bring a short story to a point of closure. And it's difficult to say exactly how that is.
I mean, if
in
anyone's
areas
read
from
Stephen King
stories.
short stories, sometimes he doesn't stick the landing either. It's a
Yeah.
very difficult thing. And you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And this is a master writer, right? And he still doesn't stick the landing all the time. Sometimes his stuff is it just stops.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you only get away with it because you're king. Right?
We know.
As a like maybe that's what his name sounds like.
Right. So
Yeah.
the same thing is true for the opening. When I was reading Slush for Black and Roots and for Slay, one of the things that took the longest time was people took a long time to get to the meat of the story. You don't have 3 chapters
No.
to set the tone. You don't have 4 paragraphs to set the mood. You have to go now. You have to hook it right out the gate because it's a short story. You don't have enough wordage to meander, to fluff, to fatten. And so my advice is in the beginning, in your opening, trim the fat, cut the fluff, right?
Yeah.
Because it gives you more word count back. So that you have more words, be tight, be concise writing. You have to have that with a short story, which is why, like David said, I prefer novels because I can spend my time world building. I can spend my time making it lush and gorgeous. But most short stories are hit the ground running.
Yeah, and in your first paragraph, I would say try to get your character to set your environment and set the tone. Like I start off one short story where it's a cranky lady living in an old folks home and how she dislikes it. And you can set that feeling in the first paragraph. And then that kind of helps you figure out, okay, this is the tone of the story and you can carry that through, but you don't have to spend chapters getting to that point.
Or your paragraphs.
Yeah.
Setting the tone.
But we're cautioning in one direction, and I want to make sure we don't overdo that.
Right.
Because the thing that we see a lot in short story submissions is stories that are really not stories yet. They're just ideas.
Yeah.
And authors present something intriguing, but they never develop it and they never delve into emotion. It seems counterintuitive, but with a short story, you actually have to dive deeper faster.
Yeah.
You have to get down into the root emotions of your characters as quickly as you can. But then you really need to stay there and live in that place because a short story can't meander. It can't wow readers with world building and description. And the way you wow a reader and the way you wow an editor is by hitting those emotional notes and getting the emotions down as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible.
So the key here is that short stories have to have a beginning, middle, and an end.
Yeah, just
They
like a novel.
still have to have an arc. It's just that instead of the
And you have to make that noise.
when it can't be this arc.
No.
It has to be that one.
Yeah.
And
Wait, what was it again?
whoop,
Yeah, okay.
so actually, you laugh, you mock, but if you are reading it and it feels like that, whoop, you are probably on the right track. Don't mock.
I didn't. I snorted.
I was mocking. So let's talk about what we mean by a short story in terms of length very quickly, because I don't want to belabor this point. But short stories can, there's a lot of variation in what a short story means. There are a few, very, very few, but some, like I think Fantasy and Science Fiction magazine takes short stories up to like 20,000 words.
Yep.
That's unusual. You're starting to hit novella
Yeah.
length, and
Yeah.
then like at the
Actually,
point
more
of
than
it-
starting. SFWA,
Yeah.
SFWA categories for prizes for nebulas. Anything 7,500 words
Oh, wait,
or
that's
less
true.
is a short story.
Yep.
Above 7,500 and below 1,700
novelette, right?
is a
It's
novelette.
That's right.
1,700 to 40,000 is a novella.
I should have known that because my friend Marie Vibert was nominated this year for
You
a
just said-
novelette.
1,700, you meant 17,000.
17,000, yes,
Yeah, yeah.
excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yes. And SIFWA is the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, in case you don't know. So it can be very, very short and it can be very, very long. I have one of the things I have suggested to friends who are having trouble who are like, I don't know, like I can't do it, is to write drabbles, to just practice like every day trying to write a drabble. A drabble is a story that is exactly 100 words, not 99 and not 101, exactly 100 words. Try doing it one day. It's brutally difficult. But what it teaches you to do is make sure every word counts.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's really great practice for that. Anyway, that's just a piece of advice that I'd like to give. So, did you have any comments on length of short story? I mean, I think Sweet Stout's about like 7,500 now, right? Like sort of.
For anthology publication,
Yeah.
that's what we're looking for.
I think
I really like the idea that the Drabbles idea. I once set out, I challenged myself to write an emotionally impactful horror story in 300 words or less. And I think I did because everybody who reads it goes, oh, when they get done. So, yeah. But, I mean, even it was a Hemingway who got challenged
Right.
the six.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
cannot create an emotionally impactful story in 6 words or less.
Yeah.
And he said, hold my beer. And then he wrote.
I think it was whiskey, but okay.
Yeah,
Sure,
Yeah,
yeah,
it was
probably.
whiskey.
And a shotgun, probably.
you guys heard this one, right?
Baby shoes for sale, never used.
Yep.
Yep.
Uh,
Right?
Instant story.
right,
Instant impact.
instant story. So, I just, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I'm just down here.
Oh my God.
You know, I'm going to tease you today. What I was going to say is sometimes the word, it depends on the genre.
Yeah.
Right. So for
Oh, yeah.
the vampire anthology, it was 7,500 words. But for the zombie anthology, it went a little higher, up to 10, because you need more time to build the visceral part of zombie. So you can't. So we gave them a little more leeway in terms of being able to write the stories for the anthology. So it kind of depends sometimes on the genre.
Yeah.
As to the length of the short stories that they're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, and in anthologies, it often really depends on how many words they want total in the anthology.
This is true.
Yeah.
Right.
Right,
That
right.
too.
Right.
And, and when I'm just writing general short stories that I'm going to be looking to publish, I don't have a location in mind for prompts or anything. I try to usually stick between 3 to 5K because that's one that I can expand on if need be, or that's pretty short to get into a lot of the submission calls. And that's kind of a good sweet spot if you're not sure how long to make it, but you want to be able to submit it around.
A lot of the submission calls will tell you that they take up to 8,000 words or they take up to 75,000 words, but they prefer stories in the 5,000
Yeah.
range.
Yeah.
So be sure to read the submission guidelines to make sure that you're like falling within the guidelines of what they're looking for. I know that's kind of redundant, but you, as an editor and a publisher for the last 13 years, I can tell you, people don't read the submission guidelines.
That's a really, really good transition because one of the most common questions they had when I was talking to the folks who are here is how do you find places to submit stories? Where are those where are those submission calls? What should they follow? How do they find them? Anybody want to start?
Our website, my Facebook page, for ours, Zombie Needs Brains, you mentioned.
Yeah,
they do calls on Facebook several times a year. So,
So in
Nicole?
Facebook, there's a group called Open Call for Science Fiction. It's a group. And they continuously put open calls for everything. So if you're like, I don't like Facebook, I don't like that, that's okay. There are some people on Twitter who have lists of science fiction publications, but Open Call and the Facebook group has been doing it for like, I don't know, 8-9 years now. And it lists, it's where a lot of publications go and a lot of people put what open calls are. And it's a comprehensive place now that Relane.com is no longer being updated. You can also go to Submission Grinder as well to kind of keep up on open calls. And it's hard.
The horror tree.
Horror Tree.
That's one I was
also-
about to say.
That's that. Horror Tree is the other one those are the three I
Those are-
use to kind of
Okay.
find where open calls are happening as a writer.
Also,
And
do a
authors and
trope.
publishers. That's
Yeah,
why
I
we
was
put it
going to
open call.
mention like the horror tree is good because it's free as well for if you're looking for horror publications.
And it's run by very
They
nice
do
people.
all publications.
And they also
though.
do author interviews. They're really good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also want to say I used to use Duotrope a lot back when it was free, and I still do occasionally because they had to go to a pay model. But they're very good because you can put in your what you've written, and it will find publications that are within that word limit, within that genre. Duotrope, Duotrope. That one's good.
For those who don't know, an open call is simply basically saying anyone can submit a story to this anthology or magazine, as opposed to, and this is quite common, anthologies that are invitation only. And so just to define the term.
And something else too, if you go on to like Kickstarter or Indiegogo and find anthology Kickstarters or crowdfund, some of those will actually be open to submissions, especially as a stretch goal. So they'll have a defined number of authors who are invited, and they'll say, if we reach this funding goal, we'll open up a slot or 2 slots for an open submission author to send in a story.
Right, and Zombies Need Brains uses that model, except what we do is the plan is always half the stories are invitation, and those are the stories that we use to publicize the Kickstarter. And then once the Kickstarter funds, we do the open call for the remaining 7 or 8 slots in the short story collection. Just so you know, I edited an anthology this year called Artifice and Craft, which is basically about cursed or enchanted pieces of art. It'll be out in September. We ended up taking 9 stories because a couple of them were a little shorter than what we anticipated, but we had 540 submissions.
Yeah.
So our
The same thing
anthology,
happened for solo players too.
Yeah.
it's harder to get into our anthologies than it is to get into Harvard.
And
Oh my gosh. What a sales point.
I know, right?
And a lot of publishers will have an exclusive month for own voices.
Yes.
So if you fall in that category, be willing to look around for those as well, because there's a big push to get more diverse submissions. And also, if you find a press that you really like and you just really like their stuff and you really want to see if you can write something for their prompts, go follow them and see when they open up for things. I did that for Air and Nothingness Press. That one's a really cool one out of England. I do that for Mocha Memoirs, things like that. Make sure you follow the places that you think you would like to be part of and the places you'd like to be, working with.
So let's push off of what you were just talking about, David, and talk a little bit about the ethos of writing short stories. And I'll tell you my very quick story, and then we'll open it up. I decided when I wanted to start writing that I was going to cut my teeth on short stories. And I have a submission spreadsheet that dates all the way back to when I started. And I think it started with a submission, my first submission. It was like in June of 2016. And actually, that's a thing. It was for a Daniel Jose Older edited thing. And he wrote me a really nice letter. But he did not take the story, however. And I decided I was going to submit, and I was going to keep this Excel spreadsheet, and I was going to highlight all of my rejections blue because I didn't want to look at a sea of red. And this was a very good decision because if you look at my thing, if you look at this, it's all blue. I mean, it's blue, 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 blue. It's just rejection, rejection, rejection. The first ones were rejected so fast that they might as well have had a rubber band on them. And then I'm very good at
You
sounds.
are sound effect lady today.
But that's what it felt like. Like I hit submit and they just saw my email and hit reject. And like that's literally how it went. Some of them didn't even write back, right? They just said, assume if you don't hear, you're not going to hear.
Right.
Eventually, but by eventually I mean like 2 years, I started getting like things that were signed by a people. Like, hey, there were some really cool elements here. Thanks. Please submit again or whatever. It didn't meet our needs. Thanks. Actual name of a human being. those were better rejections. They were still rejections, but they were better ones.
AI works.
Ouch. God.
Jason, could you pull that out of my bag?
Yeah.
Thanks. And then I started to get like, and I actually remember when I showed you this at Dragon Con, I submitted something to fantasy and science fiction, and I got an actual note. Remember I showed you that?
Yeah.
I got like an actual like, hey Joelle, this is it. And remind me the editor's name at
Is
the
it
time.
Charlie.
Finley or
Charles,
or
Cece Finley.
It's Charles,
Cece
yep.
Finley,
Yeah, it was, she's and I was so excited that I got like an actual email. Like it was huge for me, and I showed it to David. Like, look, I mean, he rejected it, but he wrote me a note. And you said to me at the time, you're like, that is actually really good. Like,
Oh yeah,
he
that's
really read it.
huge.
And so I saw him at a World Fantasy Con that happened to be in Columbus, Ohio. Afterwards, I saw him walk by, and I knew who it was, and I walked over to him, and I introduced myself and shook his hand, and I said, Charlie, you give me the nicest rejections. And the whole room cracked up because everybody knew what I meant.
Yeah.
And then it took like 5 years and over 100 submissions to sell my first professional written short story. And that was like a lot of submission, like submitting. So it's a tough road. But writing short stories and learning that structure will really help you later on if you're going to try to write novels. My thought. But it doesn't. So it doesn't mean we're not trying to say don't try. We're just at all. We're trying to say try, but know you're in good company every time you get a rejection, and just move the hell on. If you love the story and you think it can work, find another place to submit. And if you really feel like, nope, I'm done with that story, go ahead and write the next one. That's it. Anything you guys want to say on that?
No, that is excellent advice.
Just keep writing, you know.
Just keep writing,
and
just keep
yeah,
writing.
exactly. if you start to feel bogged down, because it does get to you mentally after a while, if you start to get tons of rejections, move on to another story, try something else out, experiment a little, be like, okay, let me try framing something a little differently this time. Maybe look at different genres. Maybe something that you thought you would really do well with isn't quite where you would like to be, and try something kind of adjacent to that.
Write poetry.
Experiment, yes.
Or do something different. When I am not doing well in my science fiction fantasy work, I write romance stories. I just take a different genre.
Yeah.
And I tell different stories. I know that seems like counter, like, wait, you write horror, visceral, then you pivot to, I pivot to other things. Those never see the light of day, but it gives me an opportunity to continue writing, to continue exploring other things, but it's not science fiction and fantasy focused, which gives me a breather, so to speak, until I'm ready to come back into the genre, put my armor on again, and go back into battle.
Yeah, and that's why I bounce between young adult fantasy and horror, because I like having a break from one to go do something else.
I'm sorry.
I can tell you as an editor that there are a lot of reasons people are rejected
Oh, yes.
that have nothing to do with the quality of the story. It has everything to do with what we have in the story, or in the anthology already, what the anchor authors are submitting, and what might be too similar to what they have done. Sometimes we get a lot of flash fiction submissions, and some of them are really good, but we're not looking for flash fiction. If an anthology says we're looking for up to 7,500 words, assume that a story that comes in at 500 words probably isn't going to be something that they're looking for, because that's not how anthologies generally work. If there's an anthology of flash fiction, great. But for most anthologies, they're trying to fill slots in a lineup of stories, and a 500-word story or a 1,000-word story doesn't help enough.
So let's bounce on that too, because if you're submitting to anthologies or you're submitting to magazines, you have to really look at what they're looking for. So
Please.
not just submission guidelines, but tone.
Yep.
Look at what look at science fiction and fantasy, and then look at name another good magazine, Apex or
Yep,
Yeah.
they pass.
like something.
Or via.
World.
Mhm.
Read them. Read the short stories, see what kind of things they want. I definitely got rejected from things because I submitted to the wrong place.
Yep.
Like it just wasn't the right match, and I should have known that. So really make sure you're looking at what if someone says they're publishing grimdark, don't send your happy fluffy. That's not going to work.
Your cozy mystery won't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that
We
won't work.
get Westerns all the time. We don't publish Westerns. We publish weird.
Yes.
And we are a minority focused publication primarily. I think 90% of our authors are people of color or LGBTQ or both. But so we get lots of, Lord forgive me.
Bless you.
Oh, bless you. Lots of traditional Westerns with a squaw and all kinds of other, I said forgive me, all kinds of very traditional 1950-ish Westerns. We don't do Westerns at all, and we most certainly don't do those kinds.
Yeah.
And so it literally, so I put other submission guidelines in really big letters, which means two things. One, you're not familiar with my press. Two, you have not looked at our catalog to see what we publish.
Right.
You're just saying, hey, you small, you must take anything here, take my book. So actually, Jason, are you all right?
I'm fine. That was such a mood.
It is, right? And so I think that if you are unable to at least read our books, please look at the covers and read the blurbs of what we publish to have an idea of what we do. Because I think sometimes the expectation is you do science fiction, fantasy, you'll take everything here. Well, I don't. We also do horror, but we don't do bizarro, and we don't do splatterpunk. But you don't know that if you don't look at our catalog and see that.
Yeah.
And so we're also closed. So if you're still sending me submissions.
Yeah.
So I think Jason and I have that, and I think Joel's point still stands. If you please look at what we offer before you send stuff to us.
If there are anchor authors,
Mm-hmm.
look at who the anchor
They
authors are.
Yeah.
Right.
Zombies Need Brains advertises when we do our open call, and the next open call,
Mhm.
if we do one this year, I think we're going to, it'll be in September.
And it ends in December.
Yeah. But we'll say, we take science fiction stories, fantasy stories, horror stories, and yeah, you can submit your humor story, even if it's humorous science fiction. But keep in mind, if you see that Esther Friesner is one of our anchors authors, your comedy better be pretty
Pretty
freaking
damn good.
amazing,
Yes.
because we're already getting one from her, and it's going to be stellar. And so know who the anchor authors are as well.
She's one of the funniest people.
She
Person,
is
too.
so funny.
And like I
She's
have
like stand up.
I've had misfit stories that have been rejected, and they're like, I couldn't stop thinking about the story. It was so good, but I can't really include it. It's not quite the theme, or it doesn't quite fit our brand. And I've collected a lot of those into anthologies and self-published them. And I use that with reprints because I have, after a few years of publishing short stories, you get a lot of reprints that, you have a smaller pool of publishers that will be willing to take that. So that's
Does everybody know what a reprint is?
okay.
Okay. If you don't, now's the time to ask.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, go for it.
A reprint means, I'm sorry. You
Go ahead. Go ahead. No.
No, you go.
Oh my God.
So reprints are like when let's say I had a short story picked up and they published it, but they give me the rights back in 2 years. And then it comes back to me and it's still in publication with that publisher, but, and it still could be in circulation and stuff, but the rights are now back to me. I can republish that if I want to.
So let's, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, to clarify on that, what if the rights were to do something because that publisher one defunct and it's no longer accepted?
Same thing.
So
Same thing.
Same thing. When that goes defunct, so one of my small press publishers went under last year, and they gave me basically a form saying that all the rights were reverted back to me. That I can show if Amazon or somebody comes to me and is like, hey, do you own the rights to these? And I can show, yes, I do. Or the publisher. So if you go to another publisher and want to publish it, you have to show that, yeah, you have the rights reverted back to you.
Right.
Yeah, I wanted, David said to me now, like, let's use that as an opportunity to pivot to contracts. And I think we should do that. Why don't you
Yeah.
start?
So a couple of things to look. Any anthology that's going to buy your story should give you a written contract.
Yes.
And that written contract should include a couple of things that you need to be cognizant of. One of them is pay, of course, and whether you are going to just get a flat fee, whether that flat fee is connected in any way to future royalties, which is rare, although Zombies does do royalties as well. Zombies Need Brains pays 8 cents a word, which sounds not like a lot, but it is, that's SUFO rates. That
That's
means
the
it-
pro rate.
pro
Yeah,
rate.
that's a pro rate.
Science fiction fact. For horror, it's 5 cents. At HWA,
Yeah.
the pro rates are 5 cents a word. 0.5 cents a word.
The other thing to really be on the lookout for is how the rights are defined.
Yep.
You want to distinguish between world rights, which means they can publish it anywhere without having to come back to you, or English-speaking rights, which means English-speaking countries, or North American rights. And you want to look at the term of those rights. Most short story publications are for a limited term,
Yes.
1 year, 2 years. If you see lifetime,
Be worried.
be aware and maybe think twice about submitting them, because you're never going to get those rights back. And
That's key.
So
Yep.
there's
It means
two
that
things
story
here.
would never belong to you again.
Yeah, two things too. There's the rights, there's the exclusive use rights.
right,
Okay.
yes,
There's also the
Thank you.
sunset provision or the actual book itself. And
Yep.
so what we do is we do between 6 months to 1 year for exclusive rights. And then those rights revert back to the author and they can do secondary rights wherever they want. They can put it in their own collection, whatever. And then we have a sunset provision in all of our anthologies. So after 10 years of publication, those will be taken off the market and never made again. So it gives the author a defined period of time in which their property is going to be used by the publisher. And then they know that they're clear after that. But
Are there any questions specifically about contracts? Because
Oh.
it's a tricky, I'm
It
going to
is.
come to you next, but just anything else about contracts? Because it's a tricky.
Yeah, I wanted to
Yeah,
add on
please.
to that. As far as so I've been given a contract before from a small press. This was years back, and it was a terrible contract. And they wanted to be able to take the story and then hire other authors to be able to write off that same plot and characters.
What?
They wanted
No.
exclusive rights for 10 years or
There's
something.
a big check behind that.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
things
right.
that you can look at. Writer Beware is a wonderful place to go to look for sus publishers.
Yes.
And another option that I had to do for that one was you can reach out to your state's lawyers for the arts. So I'm from Georgia, so I looked at the Georgia lawyers for the arts. They will give you a pro bono lawyer who will read over your work, your contract for you. A lot of professional writing groups have those kind of options too, like
Yeah, SIFA.
SIFA
does. And I know the HWA also has a lot of beware of these clauses in your contract listing as well. So, these are pitfalls that people fall into a lot. Well, they'll just not read the contract, they'll sign it, and they don't know what rights they're selling off. So be aware of that.
That's
the
a very-
idea that no sale is worse than a bad sale is something you need to grapple with. Better, you should not sell the story at all than sign a bad contract.
Yes.
And that goes for books
Yes.
as well as short stories.
I know audio rights are very hot right now. So are movie rights and TV rights to things because streaming, we need content, we need content,
Yeah.
we need content. So be leery of what type of rights you're giving away as well. Because some anthologies, not mine, some people have asked for movie rights to their short story collection or TV serial rights. I think it's going to be the next Love and Robot series on Netflix. So they want all the TV rights.
Yeah.
Be mindful of that. About what you're actually signing away, and if you have questions, definitely reach out to
Yeah.
lawyers or what she said in terms of that, or ask more experienced people. Hey, ask your publisher. Ask them to give you a reason for those things. Ask them to clarify. Ask them, can you amend it? That's
Yeah.
always, they don't
Yeah, you
always,
can
but
write them.
definitely
You can do
ask
that.
them, can you amend my contract? I'm not comfortable
And
with this, and this. I have done that. People have written
Same.
back to me like, Nicole, I'm really not sure about this. Can you add a date to that? Can you do this? Of course, because you're loaning me your story. Yeah, I'm paying you, but you're still loaning me your story. And if, and so I'm willing to work with people, but definitely be mindful. 'Cause y'all, it's some cutthroat people out
There
there.
are.
I'm sure you know.
And if you don't like the contract, walk away.
Don't
Yep.
sign it.
It's they're wanting your work because they see value in it.
Yes.
And if you don't like the terms that they're giving you and you're like, I want to get rid of this, no, like we can't do that.
And they won't be the only people who see value in your work.
Yes.
That's right.
Okay, all right, let's ask Jason. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna,
Okay.
to Nicole's point, if somebody is asking you for like game rights or movie rights, ask them pointedly, do they have the experience? Do they have the staff? Do they have the connections? Do they have the resources to actually go out and exploit those rights on your behalf? Because if they don't, what's the point in giving those away, right? Or selling them to them for a discounted rate? Get your IP out there in the best way possible. So, for example, if you go with a publisher and they put out books, ebooks, and audiobooks, those are the only rights they should be asking for.
Mhm.
If they're asking for more and they don't have the resources to back that up, no, don't do it.
Some things you can't negotiate. Like you couldn't come to us and say, so can we take that 0.08 and make it a 0.80?
Yeah, reasonable.
Reasonable request, right?
You had a question.
Jason, you mentioned that you recommend short stories be one scene.
That's my personal thing.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, well, because I've written short stories where I don't change point of view, but they're a little longer in this passage of time. The characters go from one setting to another, things like,
We're fine with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
perfect.
mean,
The other thing is, say I've been shopping a short story around, if you talk about moving on, and no one's biting, is it cool to just take another story and start submitting it around if no one's biting with one story?
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have multiple stories, all of those should be active out on the market. Now, you should only submit one story to one
Okay.
publisher at a time. If you don't make the mistake of sending the same story out to like 3 different places, assuming that, oh, well, one of them's going to bite, but all 3 of them aren't going to. Because what happens if 2 different people say, yeah, we want your story? Then you're
Screwed.
screwed.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Unless that publisher says they accept simultaneous submissions.
Yes, and there are some that do.
And
One of them.
I know Duotrope usually tries to keep that up to date in their formats for their publishers. They'll tell you if it's simultaneous, but usually in the guidelines they'll tell you if they accept which means you can send it to multiple publishers at one time. But you have to make sure each publisher you're sending it to is all okay with simultaneous submissions. And if one person accepts it, you have to notify the other folks, hey, this has been accepted elsewhere,
immediately.
so that they don't say yes as well and that's been published a month ago.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, because
It's
we
a
have,
good question.
we have had people submit to us. We've gone through the process of reading their submission, and then we're like, yeah, we're interested in this. Send us the actual manuscript. And they're like, oh well, somebody else has already decided to publish it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, guess what? You just earned yourself a spot on the blacklist.
Yes,
Yeah.
and those
Yeah.
lists exist, and we are
And we
constantly
talk.
adding to them, and we talk.
We talk to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that big a community. That's another thing to remember. So if you behave badly, like for example, someone sends you a rejection and you write back and tell them how stupid they were for
Oh my
rejecting
God.
I've
you,
heard of that.
this is not a good idea.
Actually, I have a story about
Yeah,
that.
because you had that happen.
Yeah,
That's-
somebody submitted to last year's crop of Zombies Need Brain stories, and they were rejected. And Joshua, being a class act, Joshua Palmatier. He's the owner of Zombies Need Brains, and he's the publisher, but he also does some editing. But he didn't tell his other editorial teams whose story this was, so we never learned which one of us did it. But somebody wrote to him and said, I sent in this story and I was waiting to see what would happen because I had decided if this was rejected, I was never going to submit another story. And you rejected me, and so congratulations, you've just killed a writing career. And first of all, Joshua is the sweetest human being on the face of the
He's
earth, and he
very,
doesn't
very
deserve
nice.
this. But second of all, that's not a murder, that's a literary suicide.
Yeah.
They killed their own career.
Yeah.
And even if they decide, well, maybe I will submit again, they better not submit to us.
Right.
Because Joshua knows who it is. I don't know the name of the person, but he does.
Well, and editors, people who read the slush and stuff are people. Like, be mindful of their mental health. There's no need to be mean for no reason.
In fact, don't respond at all.
Yeah.
This is really actually the most important thing. You get a rejection, you do not even say thank you for letting me hear. Don't do that. No one wants to be, they don't need the email. It's honestly that.
Right.
They understand you're being polite, but don't do that. You get a rejection, it's a rejection. That's it. You know it, they know it,
Keep
move
it
on.
professional.
Do
Can I
what
make a
comes
comment?
next.
Put it
Yes.
up on the nail on the wall of your writing
That's the
studio like
old
Stephen
days.
King used to do. Well, you know.
I do have received feedback after I sent rejections to people, and they're quite argumentative. It's very interesting. So the one time it happens a lot, and I don't know if it's because we're a small press, people think let's beat up on the little guy, or what, or that we're a primarily woman and femme presenting non-binary company. I don't know what it is, but I seem to get a lot of feedback always in rejections. And I did get one very similar to "You killed my writing career," except they said, there was one that's like, "I didn't want to be published by your press anyway."
And yet,
But
That's great.
So we're great. And then there were, of course, of those people who are like, you're bypassing the best novel in the world.
Oh God, yes,
Right.
I've gotten those.
It's
too.
the Harry Potter syndrome, right? And they have one that said, when I get a real publisher, I'm going to tell everyone how you didn't accept me and how you missed this opportunity for an award-winning novel. Okay.
Hey, and has that happened in 13 years?
There was somebody, sir, yes.
So, Jay, you mentioned, sometimes you don't get a rejection.
Yep, that happens. Yeah.
Is there a length of time you should wait? Because obviously you don't want to send out your short story or whatever to, 100 presses and then have it sit there and everybody goes back. But you don't
Yeah.
hear.
It's a really good question because I've waited. I mean, I tend to wait like 4 months or something like that. If they haven't gotten back to me in 4 months.
Yeah,
it's-
some places will tell you how long their wait time is.
Yeah.
I think there was one that was like, hey, our wait time is about a year. So that's how long you're going to be waiting.
I don't
and-
submit to those, by the way.
Yeah, but they do exist. And usually they'll tell you. I know Duotrope, you can track and see what other people, how long it takes other people to get rejections.
Mhm.
And that's hit or miss sometimes because some people might get 5 days and the next person has 8 months.
So
So-
an average, right, on Duotrope, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
But you can look into the details
Yes.
on that. Mhm.
I personally think a publisher not sending a rejection is bad behavior on the part of the publisher.
Yeah.
You
should let them know.
You should let them know. It's just not that hard to send someone an email.
I agree, but
so-
some of them don't. So
some-
it's a legit question, like how long?
It
do you
is a
wait?
legit question, but my feeling is you wait a few months and then if they're not going to send you a rejection, screw them. You're sending out the story again.
Can I ask a question that kind of jumps back?
Of course you can. And yes, I saw that we have another question.
And I wanted to also make a comment too, so comment and a question. I don't know if you know, but there's an actual study that's been done. So I teach comp ret and I have, and so I've read several studies, but there's this one, titular study about how the effect of reading on people's reactions.
Oh, because I did mine blue, right? Yeah.
Right. So there was an actual study that and they tracked how people reacted to red ink versus how they reacted to blue ink, and they took criticism a lot better from blue ink. But so my question is that you were talking about closure, and you have to have closure at the end of the story. Do you feel that there's a difference between closure and taking the story and resolving it in a neat little package with a bow?
That's a great
That's
question.
that's a great question.
That was very nice sound effects.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
You guys are setting the bar so
You
That is a great question. I don't like stories that tie up in a neat little bow. But a good short story, to my mind, resolves the central conflict, but leaves me as an editor or a reader thinking about what's going to happen next and where that's going. And a good ending sometimes points in the direction of a certain sort of next progression for those characters without making it feel like it's incomplete. And it's as Nicole said before, it's a really, really tough needle to thread. But when it's done well, or when we as writers are fortunate enough to do it well, it's a great feeling.
And if you're struggling to figure out how to end it in a way that feels complete, like you were saying, you don't want to have a nice bow, pretty bow at the end, but you do want it to feel complete to your reader. And you can go back to the beginning of your story, and a lot of times how it should end is up there, because you set your premise there, and then you can close that premise at the end of your story.
Okay, we have a question.
Oh,
okay. I'm sorry, Nicole. Let me just because we're almost out of time. So,
Sorry. This is kind of more of an etiquette question than anything. So, say you're an author that either writes in multiple genres or something along those lines. What is the etiquette as far as working with multiple agents and multiple publishers? Because, say, one publisher likes this one story in this genre, but they don't do another genre you wrote. So you submit that to other publishers who do that genre, yada yada.
For short stories, you can submit as many as you want, as long as you're not doing simultaneous. Throw out as many as you can. When you start getting into book publication, different publishers have different feelings about what they call non-competitive clauses and don't want a book coming out under your name in too many different genres, too close together from too many different publishers.
all right, Nicole, do you want to finish saying you?
Oh, I was going to say that.
For closing and ending.
Just closing.
Oh, endings. For me, and I think David touched on this a lot, the ending has to leave some emotional impact. It has to linger. And so after that story is over, I still want to be thinking about those characters in that situation. It needs to kind of, it's like a sort of like a closure residue.
Yeah.
I want it to linger with me. And so the stories I pick for Slay, yeah, they're vampire stories, but they have a strong emotional impact and that lingers after the end of those stories, which is how they ended up in that volume.
All right, so we're almost out of time. So let's end with, can you each recommend a short story that like has that sort of perfect structure and ending that you would recommend to other people to read?
So you can find this online. Is one of my authors, Richard Ford Burley. The story is called A Study in Pink and Gold. And it's a beautifully written story. And yes, the ending brings everything right back to it. It touches back into the story itself, which is what my definition, as we discussed earlier, my definition of how to properly end a short story. So yeah, great story.
First short story in the Artifice and Craft anthology, so it'll be out later this year. It's called Isabel in Red Lake, and it is about a young woman who wants to paint, but she lives in 17th century Italy, and so she's not allowed because she's a woman. And so she starts to identify as a man, and it has all these modern resonances, but also this lovely feel of the time. And the story ends with them setting out on this new life, and it's magical, wonderful story.
I don't have like a single short story that really encompasses that. But I find that when you find a master and you can read their work, you start to realize how to structure, how to choose length and things like that. I cut my teeth on O. Henry's work. I found his work concludes perfectly for a lot of his stories. He was very much a master at the short story form and kind of, immerse yourself in that sort of thing and study that.
Shirley Jackson's The Lottery.
Yeah.
Is like one of those stories that just has a perfect ending. And you can't imagine it ending a different way.
Yeah.
Samantha Bryant's story in My Slay, anthology is phenomenal. Like I had to sit with that for many days, but it has a perfect ending. It's an ending that you expect because it's based on Passover, but it's also not the ending you expect. So you know what I'm talking about. Yes. Okay. And when Nick makes that noise, that means it's really good.
Okay,
Sound effects.
we have 3 minutes, sir, right there in the middle. You asked specifically about conflict. Did you feel like you got your question answered?
I'm fine, yeah.
You're okay? Okay, because like I wanted to make sure we got to that. Any last question? Yes.
Recommendations for how to get good feedback on your stories.
Get a writer's group, join a writer's group,
Or
find some good
or
beta
beta
readers.
Yeah.
Yeah, Scribophile was a place that I used for a while too. Scribophile, yeah, that was basically you review other people's work and you post work and then people give you feedback. And it's really good for getting a wide variety of people to look at your stuff.
Yeah. Do keep in mind though that if you're posting something online for general consumption,
It's published.
you have just compromised your first publication rights.
Yeah.
Anytime you post anything anywhere for public consumption,
It's published.
it's
And
published.
It's
Yeah.
got to be behind some sort of login. So that site is, for example, basically you don't want to have it publicly available on the web for people to look
Yeah.
up.
Right. If
That's
you put
why
it
I-
on your website, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Patreon, would that count?
Yes.
Yeah.
Anything,
anything.
you put it anywhere on the internet,
You're done.
basically it's done.
Yeah.
You have lost your first publication
Patreon
rights.
counts. Your website
Yes.
counts.
Yes.
Anything like that
And
counts.
so I say again, beta readers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Find a group of trusted individuals who you know are not going to screw you over and get their opinion.
And I get a lot of questions of how do I find a writers group? It can be very, very difficult to find a writers group. I often say start with your local library. It's a good place to start. And eventually, maybe you know a couple writers and you start your own. You know, that might be what you do. So thank you so much, you guys.
That's a wonderful panel. I know there's a website called Twitters. If I submit my stuff there for.
Hey, Ladybug, how's it going?
It's
If it's
going.
available.
It's going. How's your
If
weekend?
it's
been?
available where anybody can read
Good.
it.
Okay.
Good. We're
It's-
good.
Yeah,
Where's
but-
your
So maybe.
It's right there. You ever been walking by it?
You
not
need to
seen
find a
I
place.
see you guys walking by. We're gonna go
I
back to
honestly
the elevator.
wouldn't
Yeah.
I'm
just
But
blind.
you usually like work.
I
You guys are
really
usually
give it
talking,
to
or
Yeah.
you got that. I've got to go. You know, that I'm getting to the
We've
elevator.
been
I have
running
stuff
between
to do.
panels so much. Kelly was on 5 this weekend, so I don't know.
I was on one with her, the representation one.
Yeah.
Thank you. You feeling okay
Yes,
today?
don't do that.
Okay.
I'm glad that they're pro bono lawyers.
Do I just contact them, or do you just donate to them, or?
8 cents a word.
Well, you probably don't need to, but just start to learn
Okay.
more.
Good panel.
Okay.
Yeah, I learned a
Did
lot.
I
during
actually
the-
cut you off at times? I am so sorry if I did.
You are a
beginning, the
master
muddle,
moderator.
the-
Okay.
Yes.
I was like, oh,
I was just showing you.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. It's a lot. It's a lot.
No, no, it's all right.
There's only so much you can get packed into an hour. You know what I mean? Because you can be sitting here for hours discussing it. Yeah, it is. And you have to, getting tough skin for rejections is probably the hardest part. You know what I mean? Like that's, for me, that was the hardest part when I first got started. So that's why I try to cover that because
I tried like.
I know for-
really good, but harder than So I did like composition.
Yes. I think so too. Because some of these people like Clarksville will reject you in like 5 minutes. And you're like, did you read the story at all? Yep, yep.
So the scholar, they might be on there, but like a rhetoric study on the use of writing, and it's like it's one of those ones that I would be interested in. I might be interested in for you to like back that onto like the idea of the book genre and that they like connect to. So there's like a crossover with like spirituality and science, So there's always those needless crossovers. I mean, spirituality and right. Or like, or the science that they use to like, create explanations for things that we just can't have answers to, So, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's always the names, like I have it at least 3 times and then I got it. But you know what, Herman is one of my favorite operas, so I will always remember, because it's the only opera whose protagonist is an soprano. Oh, yeah, there you go. So, which is, so like the soprano voice, which is like really high and erotic, like she was like, kind of like this, badass, like sexually aware person. You know what I mean? And it's so different from every other like which is also like pretty amazing for its time. Even though it's a tragedy, it's a beautiful opera. They don't help us communication. I like for animation. I'm not doing animation. But it's about and now I illustrate, so used to use it. Not that I make money off of it, yeah, I'm so for folks who the dealers area, I'm not in the dealers area. I'm in the hallway that's facing the dealers. Yeah.
actually, my husband is selling so many books. And I'll throw in the guy movie, so I just have to take it.
It's really hard sometimes. When you have all these things, people say, oh, we made it right. Yeah. Or they got 2 chapters in their computer. I got one on the way. Yeah, I mean, being a great person. Notifications people that I always focus on the notifications and I kind of ignore the rest. I don't get into that because that's not
I read Satan's Face. Satan's Face. Oh my gosh, I loved it. It was so great. And I actually, you were saying like we don't get the ending. The ending. I actually read story about there were a couple of kids and they were doing their state in college. So it was their first time doing it without having a family. And they got really good. And they were like, someone has to drink the wine. So they ran into a neighbor and knocked on their door. Can you drink this wine? He turned around and pretend Elijah drinks it. And they were like, sure. So I do understand that. That was very cool. I love the idea that religious, spiritual concepts follow us. Because they're part of us. That was the great thing about it. Yes. Very inspiring. I'm ready to write. Yeah, I read that and I was like, this is a real conversation. Yeah. And jamming all the shares together. Yeah. I love the detail of the couple that you met in the post office. And, yeah. everything I'm like, oh, that's cool. Well, thank you. Thank you for looking at it all. Yeah, that was honestly one of the best things I think. It was really well organized. No, I like that. Yeah, it's like, you guys, honestly, it's so hard to do. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. I'll do that. I'll go grab the QR code now, and then, oops, sorry. And then I think it's lunchtime. Yep, it is lunchtime. We'll see what we're gonna do about that.
Hi, you on this panel?
I am just doing a survey for the last panel last.
Okay, cool.
What's the next one? Oh, this is a long survey. Yep.
Yeah, this is probably the last one, so it's like, hopefully people show up.
Less than 2 hours.
Yes. 2 hours between now, red wine and pizza.
Yeah.
Testing, testing. Can you all hear me out there? Testing. Hello again. Good, good. One of our last panels. Yeah, it could be you and us. There you go. We should serve hors d'oeuvres and open up a nice bottle of Chianti. Howdy.
Bringing your other panelists in.
Oh, I'm sorry, what's that?
I'm bringing your other panelists
Ah,
in.
good. Just take the handcuffs off before you leave.
I mean,
Some of those people get violent.
well, luckily this one's digital. So shouldn't be much of an issue.
Well, this will be a totally new experience. I don't know if they're going to be able to see me. So who's my digital person?
I'm so terrible.
Well, it's RM Hamrick or Sumiko Salson. Sumiko. Okay. This is Sumiko.
Yep. Yes, this is the right room. You are in Walden currently.
Hi, Sumiko. We're going to have to give her all the volume that there is. Okay. We're trying to make sure that you have enough microphone. Can you hear me, Sumiko? I don't know that you can. Yeah. I'm Ed McEwen, your moderator. I don't know that you can see me at all, but I'm not that pretty, so you're not missing anything. Hi, how are you? And I'm as advertised, not that pretty. Well, thank you.
Story of my life. I've got a face made for radio.
Exactly. I always tell everybody I can do an imitation of an extrovert for about 6 hours. So I will, yeah, make it easier to see her. Okay. Yeah. Can you give her more volume for projecting? Because I think it's going to be hard for them to hear her. Okay. Okay. I'll leave. You're the pro. You tell me. Okay.
So as soon as that hears the TV, it'll start a feedback loop, and then we'll just get loud screeching. It'll just continue.
Well, Sumiko, could you say a thing or two so we can get a level off of you? Pretty good. It's early yet.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
The sound guy says you're golden. Okay. This will be a bit of a new experience for me. I hope I do it proper justice. I'll try and make sure that you get necessary time to make your points and include it in on everything. And just yell for Ed if for some reason something's not going well.
Okay, so yeah, I did one of these yesterday, and if you don't hear from me for a while, just ask me a direct question.
Will do.
Because I can't necessarily hear the other panelists.
Sure.
Like if people start speaking more quietly, I won't hear them anymore. Is what happened.
I'll
I don't want to speak over people, so sometimes I'll be trying not to speak over people accidentally in case I don't hear them.
Gotcha. I will probably throw something to you directly by name and just ask you. Am I pronouncing it correctly, Sumiko?
Yes, you are. Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Doing good. It's been a year.
It has. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
I've got other things I got to go set up. You still have.
We're going to be having a virtual guest as well.
Okay.
Facebook chat. If you need anything, just let us know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
excellent. That's perfect because Michael's not going to be here.
Oh, he's scratching. Okay.
I will. I assume so. He had to clear out and cleared out his tables. I don't know.
Is that another panelist?
Yes.
Mhm.
Why don't you introduce yourself to Sumiko?
Hi. I'm Rebecca.
Oh, hi, now I see you.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know where the camera is. There it is.
I know it's like weird because I can't see the other panelists, but I can hear you. So, yeah.
And I'm sorry, it's been a year.
Rebecca.
Rebecca. Okay, thank you. This is why I can call you. by
It's
name.
actually been a couple years since I've been here.
Really? I thought you were here last year.
I came.
I remember meeting you, of course.
Yeah,
but yeah.
19 and 21.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Time flies these
The time
days.
does fly.
Yes.
Time's been weird.
Sumiko, when we start, I'm just going to ask everybody to introduce themselves, and then we're going to sort of go around the room again. Actually, while we're introducing you ourselves, I'm going to ask you what particular connection you have with Mars, and then Mars. Well, the title of the panel is Mars Wants What? It
Yes.
can. It can.
I'm a neighbor of Mars.
I had a Mars bar once. So we're going to have Ian Randall Strock, Rebecca here, Sumiko, and myself.
So, it's
Sumiko. Sumiko. How was that? Okay.
Not Sumiko.
Sorry, Sumiko.
That's okay, thank you.
Mine's Ed, one vowel, one consonant. It makes life easy.
Oh, and I use they, them pronouns.
Okay.
In case you refer to me first.
You got it.
Oh my goodness, I can see myself. It's distracting.
So where are you based? That you're coming in over the ether?
I'm in Oakland, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Oh, lovely. Been a long time since I've been out that way. Unfortunately, with COVID and everything, travel kind of went to hell.
Yeah, I know. At the first, like, ad convention that I was supposed to be going to in Atlanta, and yeah, it's in March, so I did March 2020, where I didn't make it, and the outer dark, something really weird. I never made it out of there, and they still haven't got it back to me in person, so they gave me credit for my ticket, and I used it to go to came to Worldcon last year.
Nice.
Yeah.
COVID got me when I was trying to go to Hong Kong. I was going with my martial arts master, and we tried 3 times to go to Hong Kong. And every time he put a trip together, well, the People's Liberation Army moved, the Hong Kong government fell, and the last time was COVID. And I've just refused to travel with him after that. I think he's unlucky.
Yeah.
Hi, Rebecca.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Mhm.
I'm not sure. How about you?
Yeah, my wife and I did.
It's just a completely different feeling from New York, so I think the concept
Mhm.
I've never been here before.
I'm okay.
So different.
Yeah, that would make it a little easier on the interactive, but I'll do the best I can at this end. Ian has arrived, and we've got Rebecca.
I am.
We'll give it another minute or two for some more folks to show up.
I don't remember which panel.
It's called Mars Needs What? And
Okay, I don't remember which panel this is supposed to be.
Yeah, that is it. Mars, which is we're supposed to talk about.
Yeah, don't sit there. There's only so many few of us.
My chair's not enough space. That's better. So there was a big time.
well, it'll. Beg pardon? Oh, okay.
Oh,
I don't know who locked it. Well, we're going to close it when we start anyway. So.
Oh, it's quieter. That one open is quieter.
You
No,
can
leave
leave
it
that.
open.
You can leave that one open a bit. We'll close this one over here. That one definitely is going to white noise us out.
Yep.
Shall we give it a go? Would you mind terribly closing that?
No, I was in this room this morning.
Ah.
Everyone came through this door.
It's my first time in the room, so it's
Well,
new to me.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our panel on Mars. I wondered why I got assigned this particular one, and as near as I can tell, my connection is that I wrote a short story one time called Mars Needs Men. And for my sins, obviously, that's why I got drafted for this. This is going to be a little unusual. We have a virtual presence here of Sumiko Solson. And I, again, will apologize. I will do the best I can with pronunciations, but hopefully that one measured up. They's in San Francisco and comes to us through the magic of the internet. So actually, I'm going to start with you because it's probably easier for you that way. I'd like you to introduce yourself and sort of what is your connection to any degree that you have a connection with Mars in either your work or just in your fascination or interest with it in life.
Yeah, so my name is Sumiko Salson, and I write, I mostly write horror and Afro-surrealism, but I do write some science fiction as well. But you know, I'm an Aries, so I feel like that connects me more, right? Really named after us, so you know, there's that. I have written some science fiction that did take place in outer space in this solar system, and included places like Mars, so that might be why I'm on this panel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be my guess.
Was there a special connection or a special interest in Mars for you that you settled on it as a destination in your work?
Well, I mean, in TMZ 2525, it's where they have a cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of cannabis clubs that are in orbit around Mars, and I guess I just thought Mars seemed like a a place where people would want legal marijuana, and maybe that's why they had me on this panel.
I love it.
With that kind of
Would you mind talking to our legislature here? We need all the help we can get. Well, Rebecca, let me extend that question to you. If you'd introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work, and also what connection or interest you particularly have in Mars.
Okay. I am Rebecca Hamrick. I write science fiction. I have a sci-fi comedy which goes out into space and kind of takes everything and turns it on its head. I also wrote an alien romance, which maybe I should have brought. It's over at my table, in which aliens want our women. So from Mars, I live next door to Mars as an Earth citizen. And I once read War of the Worlds on a treadmill.
The entire War of the Worlds on the treadmill?
The entire War of the Worlds on a treadmill.
Wow. I commend you on your aerobic capacity.
I injured myself afterwards, so let's not. I just wanted to know what was at the end of the story.
And we have Ian.
I am. I'm Ian Ramble-Strock. I'm the publisher, editor-in-chief of Fantastic Books. Got the table up there. I'm also I think of myself as a science fiction writer, though 98% of my published words have been nonfiction. But I did have a story in Nature called Mars is the Wrong Color. The bulk of my fiction actually seems to be time travel through no conscious decision of my own. And prior to running this publishing company, I was very involved in the Artemis Project, which was a venture to establish a colony on the moon, which is sort of close to Mars, as in it's another orb that isn't this one that we were all born on.
Could you expand a little bit on how Mars was the wrong color?
It was a conspiracy theory to seed Mars and terraform it into something habitable for humans.
So you've been talking to Elon Musk.
In Nature, so I can't talk too much about it because that would just be telling you the whole story.
For myself, I find Mars to be a stepping stone to the outer systems, and if we're going interstellar, I think it's probably the place that we'll be going interstellar from. It has two lovely little space stations, Phobos and Deimos, which would be relatively easy to get up to. And it actually has water, and it has some air. So it's got a lot to recommend it as solar real estate. In my books, I often place the defenses for the Earth system on Mars because you would want to be able to lift off more easily, and you would want to be further out to intercept threats. Okay.
I have to question that.
Okay, question away, please.
Well,
Object.
because Mars is frequently on the opposite side of the sun from the Earth. So how defensive a position is that compared to something like the moon?
Well, they get kind of close if they're at the moon already. So, yeah, Mars would be an opportunity to intercept things further out, and sometimes it is near us and sometimes it's not. It obviously wouldn't be the only location you would want to, but remembering a scene from not long for this world science fiction series, Space Above and Beyond. You remember when the aliens got to the moon and you could see the explosions from here? That's too close.
True.
Let's talk a little bit about Mars in classic fiction. Mars is one of the focuses of early science fiction with the War of the Worlds, obviously. And then, of course, the work of Edgar Rice Burroughs in Barsoom and so forth. Let's start with Sumiko. Thoughts on Mars in more classic science fiction, or those particular ones, or anywhere else that you wish to go?
Sure. I think that one reason that people are fascinated with Mars is because the idea that Mars is someplace that could potentially sustain human life in our imagination. So I would say like Total Recall is something, and that's based on a Philip K. Dick, short story. But in the movie, Blue Sky on Mars is this whole thing, right? Where we don't really know if this is just part of his like mind trip that he's on because of virtual reality. or if Mars really has a blue sky. But even so, all throughout the movie, there are different images of people that are living on Mars that are kind of a downtrodden classic people that are sitting there getting like irradiated because of where they're living and isn't really as safe as Earth and stuff like that. So I think that that's not the only story where that concept is there, and I do think that that is part of our fascination with Mars. It's not only is it close, but we feel like it has a solid crust. It's not like a gas giant or something. So we feel like potentially we could maybe live there, terraforming and stuff. And I think terraforming comes up a lot, I think, in different science fiction that discusses Mars as well.
Absolutely. Let's put a little note to come back to that regarding colonialism and Mars. So we'll circle back to that, but I wanted to give the other panelists a chance to comment on the same thing. Mars, sort of in classic science fiction literature. Rebecca?
I mean, I think it is because it's so close, and that was kind of the first thing that we were looking at was that and the moon, what could be there, and with War of the Worlds, that was actually kind of part of his H.G. Wells' time was an attack out of nowhere from a foreign country or someplace like a foreign alien world, and that we should prepare for it ahead of time, that it could happen at any time and that we needed to be prepared.
There was a great T-shirt that was being circulated a couple of years ago when the first Martian probes were arriving, and they were failing one after another. And the first one said, one time is an accident, 2 times is a coincidence, 3 times is enemy action, bomb Mars now. So there's something about that baleful red gem in the sky winking at us that definitely awakens paranoia. Ian?
Well, I keep thinking that we slipped into an alternate universe sometime in the late 1950s, because up until that point, perhaps it was the 1960s, but up until that point, Venus was a young jungle planet, and Mars was a very old desert planet with an old race living on it, and perhaps water in the canals. And after that time, suddenly Venus became a very hot, gaseous greenhouse that nobody wants to go to, and Mars became just a desert. And then, of course, and then, of course, in the 1970s, we discovered that Mars has craters, and we'd never thought of that before.
Yeah, it makes it a little hard on the canal builders. You're getting bombed by asteroids and so forth. Yeah, I think that is one of the classic tropes of Mars, which is that it is an ancient, and I think Wells even described it as a degenerate race, sort of hanging on in their last efforts to avoid entropy and the oncoming cold of Mars, because unlike our planet, which actually has an active core, Mars is cold, solid rock all the way through. So let's look at some of the more recent explorations of Mars, maybe in film or more recent books. You've had Larry Niven terraforming Mars by dropping an ice asteroid on it. You've had The Martian. You've had The Martian Chronicles. So, Simiko, any thoughts on any of those? You did bring up Total Recall.
Recent, I don't know. You got me there. I don't know that much about recent things about Mars.
So, The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, not too recent.
Yeah, that's not too recent, and that Martian that they had, my favorite Martian that was on TV.
Oh yes.
Yeah, my favorite Martian is maybe not that recent either, because I was a kid like 45, 50 years ago. But yeah,
I have a feeling we were looking at the same Admiral TV. I believe that actually started in black and white, didn't it?
The originals.
It did. So when I was a kid, they still had TV guides that had black and white and color listed, because like a good half of the things on TV in the early 70s were still in black and white, and that was the ones that started in black and white. And there were a series of different types of comedy encounters with space life on television like more from work, but I think that wasn't particularly Mars.
Mhm.
But I think that even with my favorite Martian, the idea that people from Mars look like human beings was there, and I think that that's something that comes up a lot too. It's like an anthropomorphism.
Mhm.
Like, really, why wouldn't we see people that lived on Mars or creatures that lived on Mars as being something that was completely unlike human beings? They keep showing up as humanoid over and over again.
Robert Heinlein, in his books on Mars, had pretty different looking Martians, though he also had canals, if I recall correctly. So, any thoughts on more recent depictions of Mars? We had the movie The Martian and others. Feel free to comment.
Yeah, Andy Weir did The Martian, which was like the colonization, but it was just himself of Mars, which was interesting. And then he did Artemis, which was a colony on the moon. I like some of the more modern depictions of that aliens have come from far away because they've seen our television shows. Carmen Loop, she writes, she's in the vendor's room, and the alien comes because he loves I Love Lucy, and he wants to know what happened. So he comes, and the broadcasts have taken so long to get there that he thinks it's a modern show, and he wants to meet Lucille Ball, and he wants to know what's going on. And he's also confused as to why the whole world's not black and white on our planet. So I do like some of these modern depictions of, why visitors might come here and maybe not take over the world.
Well, if they were, go ahead, please.
I was going to say that the recent science discoveries on Mars, I maybe should have mentioned that because they have found more evidence that there has been water there.
Yeah, I think the aliens were obviously not watching the early Star Trek series, or they would have known not to come anywhere near Earth. Captain Kirk is protecting this place.
I don't know how often did Kirk get back to Earth, but I too was
actually
gonna
never in the original series.
Twice, but yeah. I too was going to mention Heinlein, specifically Double Star, with the
Right.
truly aliens on Mars, and also, of course, Mars Attacks. But for more realistic depictions in fiction, I have to point to Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy. Red, blue, and red, green, blue, whichever order they came in, because Stan actually knows what he's talking about with a great deal of that.
Mars, as it comes up in science fiction, often ends up in a colonial conflict with the Earth government that settles Mars, somewhat reminiscent of the original schism between the United States and England. You've seen that in The Expanse, Babylon 5. Have about some comments on that one. Actually, I'm going to start with Sumiko on that because you can't see us, so my pointing did not help.
I think that's come up a whole bunch of times. I think that, there's Forge of Mars, which is Bruce Balfour wrote that. And I think I mentioned earlier, obviously, the Total Recall. And I think that one thing that makes this come up a lot, again, is that people feel like they can terraform Mars. And just in February, which is really recently, NASA discovered with a rover that there are clear evidence of ripples that were formed within ancient lakes on Mars. So there has been water on Mars, and I guess that the idea is that we can go over there and we can terraform it and we can create it. But then, in these colonial situations, it's more like what you said with like the United States and also Australia, right? Where they're going to send people to Mars to create Mars. So they're going to send people to do the terraforming. And usually what you have is these people that go there as these workforces become a class of people that are have colonized Mars and are now our lower class people who eventually go to war with and break off with Earth, duplicating different themes from the history of usually from the history of Great Britain specifically, although there probably are some other ones. And I think that in terms of how it relates to the history of the United States, I think that we did have people go in the Wild West and build railroads and stuff to get here. And I think that a lot of that stuff is being duplicated in these stories.
Well, and Mars would have the advantage that there wouldn't be interaction with an indigenous race, at least as far as we know. But will we bring to Mars the same sort of difficulties that we have on Earth in governing over distances? And, is there a danger of oppression of people who are, as you say, maybe at the end of the line, digging up water on Mars, digging up minerals? Becca, thoughts?
I mean, I think that's kind of natural because if we were to go send out a colony to Mars to terraforming, we would be doing it from a standpoint of how does it benefit Earth?
Mm-hmm.
How does it benefit us? But then as you send people out there, the priorities are changed, right? And they realize that they're on their own. And yes, the government on Earth has some interest in them, but they've got a lot of other things going on. So you're not going to get the amount of attention and stuff that you need. And it's going to be it's all going to be Earth centric.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're on your planet, on what you've called now your planet, you're going to want the government and the society and the community to be able to sustain itself and maybe not necessarily, sacrifice things for Earth that's way over there. I think that's kind of natural and makes sense. And
For literary revolutions, I usually point to Heinlein's Moon as a harsh mistress, which admittedly was the moon, not Mars. Also, Isaac Asimov's The Martian Way. And then Pamela Sargent's wonderful short, though probably dated, short story, Danny Goes to Mars. But then I look at the realism behind it all and note that there's absolutely no earthly, and I use that word properly, earthly reason to set up a colony on the moon, on Mars, anywhere else, simply because of the cost of getting there and the cost of getting back. At $10,000 a pound to get anything into orbit, there's nothing out there in space that's worth going to bring back here. Even an asteroid full of platinum, if you bring that much platinum, you crash the economy and suddenly platinum is worth about 12 cents an ounce. So it doesn't really matter. Setting up a colony that will then be beholden to the Earth government doesn't really make financial sense anywhere along the way.
Even if you think that
And I'm sorry, I was also going to note the travel times. A Martian colony is 6 months away and 6 months back. I mean, even when
communication.
Communication isn't such a problem.
Okay.
It's 1.23 seconds to talk to the moon. It's maybe 20 minutes to talk to Mars. When the European countries were colonizing the Western Hemisphere, it was a month to cross the ocean. That was a long time, but that was a month with air. And when you got there, there was food and there were trees. And there was an environment in which to live. Traveling to Mars, it's 6 months at best each way. And you've got the communication, but it's going to be really difficult to get there, really expensive, and probably not worth it.
So we can anticipate that Carnival Cruise Lines is probably not including Mars.
Well, no, see, now that's the
destination.
key point is for something like a vacation, an experience, that's what makes financial sense going into space.
Retirement cruises.
A 2-week vacation to the moon makes perfect sense.
Mhm.
Perhaps not a 2-year vacation to
To
Mars.
Mars, yeah. And so you get more
But it's
PTO
the
than I do.
You can sell the experience more than you can sell any of the materials, anything that you're going to find.
That's a very interesting point that you're raising there, that what may become the medium of commerce may be the experience as opposed to a material and so forth. we're going to diversify where the human species lives, which gives us a certain amount of protection there. But as you say, even if it's going to be easier to lift things off the surface of Mars, and once you have functioning space stations around the moon and so forth, you can do a lot with railguns. So the price of lifting and moving things is going to go down. But to truck stuff through space, it has to be really, really fine stuff. And as you also validly point out, if you truck too much of the really, really fine stuff, you can create a big problem at the other end there. So, Mars can be the first step in a disaster, or it can be the stepping stone to Jupiter and beyond, and so forth. We have a question from the audience. Go ahead.
Elon Musk and SpaceX have been talking about making humanity multiplanetary, and this big spaceship they're working on, Starship, is really intended for that purpose. And he's talking about getting the cost of a ton. Let me rephrase that. I can't remember if it's a pound or a kilogram for it for $1,000. And he pretty well laid out the economy and really thinks that it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
And he's talked about eventually having the necessary colony to have a really self-sustaining, if something disastrous happens to the Earth, of 1 million, people living on Mars. And he's talking about ultimately building as many as 1,000 of these starships. And he's got the financial wherewithal in the profits that SpaceX is making from orbiting satellites and the Starlink business. And he's kept that private. It's not, stock ownership by, except for a few people that, share his idea of the stock ownership is him and the employees of SpaceX.
So what then is the practical approach to settling Mars?
Well, even with that, he still requires several quantum leaps in technology, because cutting the price from $10,000 to $1,000 a pound still means it's going to be $205,000 just to put this body in space.
Mm-hmm.
Forget the clothing, plus all the materials you need and the food and all the other people. We need another order of magnitude before we can get people off the surface in any significant number, or we need a quantum leap in technology. A space elevator would be wonderful. We don't have that today. And as you mentioned, Elon Musk is doing it in a closely held corporation, which is wonderful because stockholders want to see a profit in 5 years. There's no way they're going to pay for a long-term space venture. The problem with the few space companies we've got now is while the visionaries are running them, that's great. But when they die, will their heirs continue? We don't know.
And it is often a problem in American business that everything has a 5-year horizon. And in fact, the world doesn't work that way. You have to make these investments generationally.
I have dealt with it from both sides as the Litter Resources Company and also working on Wall Street. So I've seen it from both sides. Long-term money is really hard to come by.
And is Mars the place that we want to go? As Elton John noted, it's colder than hell. Sumika, is Mars where we should be putting our eggs, or should we be putting them in deeper space, the moon?
Okay, so yeah.
Oh dear, you may have, we've at least temporarily lost you.
Well, while we're waiting for her to come back,
We'll soldier on in the meanwhile.
Heinlein did say once you're in low Earth orbit, you're halfway to anywhere.
Yeah.
It's the reason the Artemis project was looking at the moon was because while low Earth orbit is wonderful in terms of out of the gravity well, there's not a lot of stuff there to build your ship out of. Right. Whereas the moon's got stuff. It's 1/6 the gravity.
Which is why I think the moon makes sense as a destination, because you've got the building material. It's going to be easier to build the starships or the spaceships.
Mars, some of these places take years and years to get to. So we're not going to have our first attempts at populating a planet be something that's super, super far away. If we want to get to a planet that's super, super far away, we're going to start with something closer and then maybe even eventually get to the point where we're going to be going really, really, really far away. And then I think the other question is why was brought up? Why would we want to go there? So space tourism was brought up. But I think that another thing that comes up a lot in science fiction is the idea that we're going to go there because we're getting overpopulated. In Kim Stanley Robinson's Red Mars, which came out in the early 90s, so that is actually more recent. And that was why we went there. Of course, that story takes place in 2026, which is next year.
Close enough, yes.
Yeah, it's next year. So the technology definitely isn't here, and the planet isn't actually so overpopulated that we need to move people off the planet. And, in terms of science, it is really coming up more and more that there actually is plenty of land that is not really overrun or populated, and that probably redistributing where human beings live on this planet would make more sense than shooting them off into space now, because it's not really like every single segment of this planet is overpopulated. But again, yeah.
I think Ian was addressing that. Yeah, I think Ian was addressing that point in support of what you're saying, which is, redistributing population is going to be ridiculously expensive, even if you get it down to a fraction of what we have now. But the nice thing about humans, and if we go to other planets and stars, horses, dogs, and cattle, is that they create more at the far end. So I've always thought that one of the big problems for humanity in terms of diversifying into these environments is coming back from them. Larry Niven kind of dealt with that with his belters, who are people that live in the asteroid belt, who spend most of their life in microgravity. And the idea of trying to come from microgravity to, Florida or anywhere else is just, appalling. Just imagine weighing so much more than you did before, the sense of oppression of being suffocated. I very seriously doubt that anybody would want to move from Mars or the asteroid belt to Earth. Now, you might well have, fabulously wealthy people trying to outrun entropy and death who might want to move to Mars or the asteroid belt, where you don't need your heart to pump anywhere near as well. And it's going to be a lot easier to keep you going in those environments once you actually get there. So,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to jump on it and say, using space travel as a population bleed valve, there's no way we can launch people at as fast a rate as we generate them. However,
well, launching them we can do. Getting them to land safely is another issue. One way or another takes care of the problem.
Launching them alive, for that matter. But the other point, that spreading humanity to multiple planetary bodies to ensure the survival of the species, if we're in agreement that the species should survive, there are other ways to do it.
Somebody did not have his morning coffee.
There are other ways to do it. While I would love to go out there myself, I don't know that it's going to make any sort of sense ever to launch people as opposed to perhaps just our genetic material. And to that, I'd point to Alan Steele's novel Arkwright, which I've just been raving about, even though I didn't publish it, where he talks about precisely that, sending out our genetic material in a manner that will guarantee the survival of the species, if not the people.
Frederick Pohl had an interesting take on that also, which was that you might be able to, it's not 3D print, but some equivalent process of which you could regenerate yourself on the other end of a transmission. So while you yourself would not be there, and essentially and effectively a clone of you with your memories and so forth would take up residence at that location.
So
I did see I did see a hand in the audience.
I was referencing Highland and the really seminal Mars from Red Planet. The adults in the story still consider themselves, beholden to Earth, and they're going to do, all right, the government says we have to do this, that, and the other, we're going to do it. The kids that were born on Mars, they're like, why are we going to listen to Earth? We're Martians.
The comment
Disregarding the native Martians, but they're like, we don't have to do what Earth says because we're Martians, we're not Earthers.
The comment from the audience was interesting. It's a point I did want to explore a little bit. At what point do the Martians become Martians as opposed to Earth people temporarily on Mars, and what's the effect of that? Another comment or question from the audience?
Piggyback off what she said within Starship Troopers, timeline even took it a step further on speculating like how long does it take for the generations to pass on this specific planet, this specific planet, whatnot, till those humans effectively don't see themselves as humans anymore, but their own species.
And that was one of the things that occurred in The Expanse. In there, they were willing, and this was the Outer Belters, were willing to destroy Earth, the wellspring of humanity, because they did not identify as humans. Now, one or two points I wanted to toss to the panel first. Give me some of the odder Mars things that you've run into. I've got one or two myself, but I want to see, either odd depictions of Mars, either in writing or in video. Just, you mentioned My Favorite Martian, which was one I had not thought about until you mentioned it. And it was one of the earliest portrayals of a Martian. Rebecca?
They weren't Martians, but I think the oddest depiction was signs, and that the aliens came to conquer Earth, but they, spoiler alert, were allergic to water. So I think some of the odder depictions are, why would you go to, but that's the same thing with us going to Mars. Like, why would we go to Mars? I mean, I guess that's kind of the same, same here. Why would they have come here?
Well, there was one very small Martian, and it used to make him terribly, terribly angry if there wasn't a big boom. Our friend Marvin the Martian. Ian, thoughts?
Haven't we listed them all already? Mars
No,
Attacks.
I've got an odd one for you, but go ahead.
Rolling across the deserts of Mars.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Well, for me,
Earth girls are easy.
all right, Earth girls are easy.
I'm only.
For me, one that my wife and I both enjoy, we both love Japanese animation. There's a series called Aria. And Aria posits that Venice, which is my favorite place on Earth, and sorry, not the one in California, the one in Italy, is in fact reconstituted on Mars, which Venice is rapidly eroding and disappearing into the sea, and that which of it is not immediately threatened by the sea is threatened by salt that's getting into the marshlands and getting absorbed into that old concrete and into the old pilings that support Venice. And in this version of the future, Venice is reconstituted on a terraformed Mars, which is so thoroughly terraformed they called it Aqua at that point. They even possess a technology to increase the gravity on it, because one of the problems with terraforming Mars is that water vapor and oxygen are going to escape. So you have Venice rebuilt with my beautiful St. Mark's Plaza, the Cappuccino place that my wife and I enjoyed cappuccino on our anniversary, and all the gondoliers are beautiful and young and sing wonderfully and take you through all of the canals. It's exquisite in its own thing, and for somebody to love Venice the way I did, it was kind of captivating, and they draw it so well, you're going like, I was there. So that's an odd bit of Mars that would sneak up on you. Sumiko, any odd portrayals of Mars that strike your fancy?
Well, I mean, this is more like an odd portrayal of science for getting to Mars, but in Greg Bear's Moving Mars, basically they develop an advanced AI and then just link human brains directly to them. Now, I know that in practical terms, this brings up a lot of economic issues that make it seem impractical. But when you think about it, this isn't the only, weird science we got there thing, because in Star Trek, they're constantly using things that, are just people, but yeah, basically, yeah, just hook your brain up to an AI, there you go. No need for a rocket ship.
Yeah, you might actually be manipulating a robot or something at the other end, directly experiencing what it does. I know one of the moments that really caught my attention was seeing movement on Mars. There was a live stream of one of the rovers, and I'm watching dust devils on Mars. And nowhere else do you really see movement in outer space, because there's no generation. There's no animal or anything to do it. And to see the wind stirring the dust made it feel very, very real to me. So, any recent NASA stuff that you want to comment on, Becca?
I have not been following NASA very much,
Mhm.
so I feel like you guys would be able to expound better.
Well, as you noted at the beginning, it seems 1 out of every 2 Mars probes is apparently eaten by the Martians. So, yeah, I like that part.
Well, and of course, one of those Martian probes was eaten by the difference between metric and imperial, which is one guy was doing the landing in metric, and the other guy had done the approach in imperial. And the signal to fire the thrusters arrived 20 seconds after the probe arrived. So we, in fact, haven't bombed Mars fairly regularly.
On the other hand, Mars is the only planet we know of entirely inhabited by
Robots,
life.
yes. I wonder if that robot life is going to get kind of annoyed. It's like, you stuck us out here. It's cold. My solar cells aren't doing very well.
And yet they all keep living so much longer than anticipated.
Oh, remarkably so. I mean, some of these things had lifespans, anticipated lifespans into days and weeks, and they've gone for years. Go ahead.
Well, that's why we keep them so far away.
We hope they stay so far away. Mhm.
In defense of NASA, the Imperial mess up was the contractor's fault.
Mhm.
The Rockwell Collins didn't abide by it.
Yeah, no, I mean,
We have-
NASA, they do remarkable work all the time.
We have an attorney from NASA here today with us. No, I have great love and respect for NASA. Don't take it any other way. Sure, comment.
It's just a funny story.
Just decided making a petition that says, when we make our first colony, if we make our first colony, we take any of the rovers that we find and we make monuments for them. Using the rovers themselves.
I think they absolutely deserve that. Absolutely.
Actually, that was Ben Bova has done that in 2 different books, where somebody builds a road out to where the rovers were, both on Mars and on the moon, and sells them and makes it a tourist attraction. People out there. Then, since he's a nice guy, he arranges for his own crew to receive the benefits, the profits.
And Star Trek Enterprise did show us Sagan Station there.
Artemis by Andy Weir. It's a colony on the moon, but it's a lot of it's space tourism. As people go up there, and the original landing site is a whole museum that you can go visit, where the footprints, and they talk about the flags that were put up and have been destroyed by the wind and all that. But we were talking about the probes. I wrote a short story called Harbinger, in which a probe is sent to Earth. And it's a spaceship, and it comes in orbits. But something has happened and it's empty. It was supposed to be filled with people, whatever aliens. And so we kind of make it a little tourist attraction ourselves, and we destroy it, and we put a bunch of weather vanes on it. And then another one comes, and this one's occupied, and they see what we have done to their technology, and maybe have taken out their people. They don't know. So just looking at it from a different angle of are these probes, are these enemies? What are they? We need to destroy them.
There was a Russian book, and it was a movie also called, I think it's Roadside Attraction, and basically theorized that or it might have been Roadside Picnic. Basically, aliens coming here would be almost incomprehensible to us and their technology, and the stuff that they leave behind, which may just be litter to them, could be deadly dangerous to us or fascinating. And in this one area where there has been an alien landing, you develop these guys who are kind of specialists in going in and trying to find things. And they know if you go 3 steps in that direction, there's a gravity gradient that'll smash you flat. 2 steps in that direction, your insides are reversed, and so forth. And, it seems kind of crazy. And then you think, well, if you were someone from 3,000 years ago and you're wandering around a modern factory, what's your life expectancy? Before a cuber gets you, you fall into an elevator shaft, things of that nature. Arthur C. Clarke, I think, did something similar in some of his short fiction.
Well, there were a number of people killed when they converted. I'm sorry. There were a number of people killed. They had converted the old cotton mills using the same machinery, but they had converted from having these big belts made of buffalo hide, which is why they killed off the buffalo really, and they converted it to running electric cables on machines. And they lost a few people who insisted on putting their hands on the electric cable in the wrong part of the electric cable.
Yeah, so much of this machinery was not designed ergonomically with anybody's safety in mind. So if we go to Mars, thoughts from the panel as to what would be the best thing that we could do with Mars? Terraform it, leave it alone, try to adapt to a Martian environment? Sumiko, thoughts from you?
Honestly, I think that if we go to Mars, the most practical thing probably will be tourism on Mars, at least initially, because I think that terraforming Mars is something that's going to be extremely expensive. So I think that having a small, maybe like domed place that has where we can breathe and stuff like that would be the most practical way for people to go there. And also, I think that since tourism is something that private people benefit from, that that would be something that would motivate them. I do feel like real estate is something people are super greedy about, and I feel like as soon as it's possible to sell real estate anywhere, there will be real estate agents.
Now, that is a science fiction plague I don't think anybody really considered to this point, and possibly, your next book.
I've actually written on real estate.
Oh, okay. Okay. We're going to turn this over to Rebecca. Go ahead.
Just from a humorous perspective, it was they auctioned off a moon. So, and there's an entire species that all they do is sell real estate through other planets. And it doesn't necessarily have to be good real estate.
Were they called the Ferengi by any chance? Ian?
Well, I know there are at least two companies that have sold deeds to land on the moon, and I think at least one of them is trying to sell Mars, but I don't know that any of those mean anything because, of course, once somebody's actually there, then they are going to make the law and they are going to make the claims. But to the point of what are we going to do when we get there? If it's easy enough for us to get to Mars in a big way, then I don't think Mars will be a stopping point. I think Mars is a destination in our minds right now precisely because it's so difficult to get there. We can't conceive of going even farther when it's at optimum a 6-month trip just to get to Mars, and you're there 2 years before another 6-month trip to get back here. But if we can get there faster, that means that we've developed a constant thrust drive that can get us almost anywhere very, very fast. And suddenly Mars is just a way station on the way out.
You have your eyes on Europa, is that it?
Titan, Europa, Proxima Centauri.
You sound like you have.
Colony Joe, where they start dropping these people's minds are put into machines for exploring Jupiter. They don't want to come back.
I remember that one. Is there not a United Nations treaty about owning things in deep space?
The Moon Treaty was signed by I take that back. The Moon Treaty, the Outer Space Treaty. One of them says that no nation or state shall lay claim to anything out above the atmosphere. The other one was signed only by several non-spacefaring nations. Yes, it was the Outer Space Treaty says no one shall lay claim, blah, blah, blah. The Moon Treaty was not signed by anybody, any spacefaring nation,
Mhm.
saying basically the same thing about the moon. But they all only speak to nations and states. They don't speak to individuals, because when they were promulgated, it was inconceivable that an individual or a company would get into space. They're both products of the 1960s.
So that's an interesting thought there about a legal framework for the exploration and, frankly, exploitation of space. Do we
Well-
run the risk of a land rush on Mars?
Well, and again, the point is them that's there makes the rules.
Yeah, until somebody larger with more armament comes along and makes a new
Exactly.
rule.
Yeah, I think we'll bring our problems there.
Well, that was one of the interesting things I always felt about the Babylon 5 series, which, unlike Star Trek, really didn't posit that we would change that much in space. We would go out, we would be the same cheeseburger eating, throwing the cigarette out the window, advanced monkey that we are here, and that we would probably bring a lot of our bad habits there. Any thoughts on that, Simiko?
Yeah, so I think that, well, first of all, it makes sense that we wouldn't change that much. And I think that as far as different types of depictions of when we depict other creatures like aliens that we have coming from Mars, like Mars Attacks, like Invaders from Mars, like War of the Worlds, they always come here and they do dirt. So I think that it's interesting that, we have all these high-minded ideas about us going out into space and us doing all the good things. But then when we think about Martians coming here, we think that they're going to be not very nice. And I think maybe we're projecting our own dirt onto them. So yeah, I think Babylon 5 is more realistic.
I've always felt that depiction of the future, or as Jakar said one time to a human that had woken up from frozen sleep, go back to where you came from. The future's not all it's cracked up to be. So some additional questions or thoughts from the audience? Go ahead.
It's kind of an answer to her. My thoughts. Our human history, like the Vikings, when they came to North America,
Mhm.
they were here for a short period of time because they couldn't sustain themselves, so they left. Then later on, Columbus came and he got here and said, hey, I'll see a few things, grabbed a couple things, went back to Europe and said, hey, look, this is what you got. Look what's over here, tobacco. I'm using an example.
Sure.
And then later on,
Mostly gold and
all of a sudden,
silver.
it was like a big jump. Everybody was coming over.
Mhm.
And it became the United States. I think that's kind of like what's going to happen to Mars.
Mhm.
We're going to land there, we look around, say, okay, it's nice here, we're going back, we can't stay here.
Mhm.
And then the next group will come and say, okay, they find something on Mars that's useful, let's take it back and show everybody back there. And all of a sudden, there's going to be a big, giant leap. A whole bunch of ships are going to come here. We're going to develop technology like maybe improve gravity.
Mhm.
Our culture's going to have to change because right now we're very standoff with each other. There are different cultures don't like getting personal, up close. We'll use the same bathroom.
Mhm.
That's going to have to change for us to go to Mars and stay there. And Mars becomes, maybe it'll be like a new world for us.
Well, and that's an interesting thought, comment from the audience about how living in the enclosed quarters that would certainly be necessary for the early exploration of Mars might generate a society that, has less standoffishness, more of maybe a communal feel, because it would certainly be them against Mars.
Well, that's one of the positives that came out of the Biosphere 2 experiment. I mean, the science of creating a self-generating environment didn't really work, but having people living in an enclosed space together for a long time,
Mhm.
we learned sociologically from that. I also wanted to comment on all the aliens coming and killing us, but there are a few occasional references to aliens that don't want to come and kill us. Arthur Clarke's The Gods Themselves.
Mhm.
A benevolent race of aliens, so we can envision them. But I do think we, or at least those of us who have the vision to leave the planet, will perhaps not bring along so much of the things that we think make us the dirty apes that live down here in the dirt. And again, I point to Arkwright by Alan Steele because it's a wonderful book and talks about such things.
Mhm. I do think sometimes in terms of going to a place like Mars, yeah, there is a high-minded thought of exploration and, the opportunity to maybe contact new life. But I also remember a certain crewman from Forbidden Planet who was on the cruiser C-57D and said, another one of these unexplored planets, nothing to do but throw rocks at cans, and we have to bring the cans. So I think that's going to be an aspect too, which is that you're going to have to create a society there and a reason to be there, more than just a view. Thing about space tourism that worries me a little bit is that it would really only be available to the extremely privileged.
Well, to
Sumiko?
begin with.
To begin with, yeah. Do you envision that it's going to get so much better that
Everything starts off very expensive and becomes cheaper.
Mhm.
Cruising was the same way.
Mhm.
Anyone can go on a cruise.
Mhm. Okay, we have an optimist on the panel. I like that.
I just want to point out to her thoughts on Star Trek. There was a massive traumatic event in the Eugenics Wars,
Mhm.
and I think there was a
In the mid-1990s, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which obviously didn't come about.
We just don't
I think the
hear about it
eugenics
anymore.
wars and the Third World War more or less morphed into the same sort of thing.
Yeah, so I don't think it's so much that the culture changed, it's that, or we changed the culture, it's that the culture was forced to change.
Mhm. Are you referring to the Star Trek culture was forced to change by the global events?
We didn't change the culture changed us
Mhm.
in a way.
Mhm.
So
And that may be an event, in our near-term horizon with some of the climate difficulties that we have. We may all end up having to pull together sooner than we think.
yeah, so
Mhm. All right. Any last questions or comments from the audience? And now I'm going to ask everybody both to comment finally on Mars and then tell us a little bit about where you can find their work. Go ahead.
Whenever people talk about why, I go back to Jules Verne's.
Mhm.
And From Earth to the Moon, the man who realizes I can get in this cannonball and fly to the moon.
Mhm.
They were going to shoot a cannonball. The Americans could shoot a cannonball at it. The Frenchman sails over and says, I can fly to the moon like this.
Mhm.
A group of reporters naturally surrounds him as soon as he gets off of his boat. One of them yells, why would you want to go to the moon? What do you expect to find there? And he looks at him and says, if I knew what I was going to find, I wouldn't have any reason to go.
Absolutely.
Hang on to that thought.
And closing thoughts on Mars. We'll start with Rebecca.
I agree that it might just be a baby step for us.
Mhm.
I also think that possibly for medical reasons, if we can't solve some of our problems, that some lower gravity areas will be a great place to retire, right?
Mhm.
Because your mobility and stuff will be changed, your circulatory system will be changed.
You mean I may not need to have that knee replacement that the doc's talking about? Okay, good.
And then we can sell tourism tickets to your children to come visit.
Yes, yes. Space retirement.
The grandchild package. And would you also just tell us a little bit more about it, your writing and where it can be found?
Sure. I write a lot of hand-wavium sci-fi,
Mhm.
not hardcore Mars stuff. But you can find me at the table between the broken escalator and the not working quite well bathrooms.
Sumiko, there's some things you're not missing by not being here. Okay. Ian, closing thoughts and some stuff about your work?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I seem to be a bit more moon-centric than Mars-centric. It's my background with the Artemis Project, which was before Andy Weir took the name for the book. But hell, NASA took the name too because it's the right name to use. Nevertheless, whether you're looking at the moon, Mars, Venus, or farther out, keep looking up because that's the important part.
I like
Look up
that.
and then try to get there. If you're looking for me as the writer, IanRandallStrock.com. My name is unique on the internet. If you see Ian Strock, it's me. And me, the publisher, is fantasticbooks.biz because the .com they want many thousands of dollars for.
Sumiko, any closing thoughts on Mars, a little commentary on your work and where it can be found?
Yeah, so I think that because, first of all, I think that everybody should go check out the NASA website. We have a lot of really wonderful information and photos and things about Mars, where we're at right now. I think that as much as tourism might be problematic, that because we just do not give enough funding to NASA these days, that it's probably going to be better in the long run that people that have a private interest want to get there, because there'll be more exploration. I think ultimately, as far as my writing, I am a Bram Stoker and Elgin Award nominated horror poet. I mostly write horror.
Okay, Horror on Mars. That'll be our next one.
Yeah, I do write some science fiction, but most of it is horror. And you can, I have a website, it's my name, SUMIKOS, AULOSON.com. So go to my website and you can see, I actually do comics, so you can see my comics, you can see my books. If you want to read my science fiction, it's mostly short stories that are in different anthologies, but I think that my book Within Me Without Me has actually got a few different ones in there, a few science fiction shorts. So yeah.
Excellent. And my personal thanks for working with us. This wasn't the easiest format to attend a panel in, so thank you very much. And me, just signing out. I'm Ed McEwen, science fiction writer over here. You can find me and my stuff outside, or you can find it on Dread Amazon. And thank you to everybody for attending, especially this late in the con. And thank you to my panel over here for your unique and interesting insights. Thank you all. Sumiko, I don't know how to turn you off. You may have to turn yourself off at your end.
Yeah, I know how to leave.
Okay.
I just have to hang up the little red phone button.
Okay, sounds good. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. You were a great audience.
Bye.
Okay, it's the crowd trying to get out the room.
Nobody throw an elbow. I think we exhausted Mars as a topic, though.
With that said, too, once we go to Mars, you said you can find cures. Also, are we going to find problems?
Well, that is the other side of that. Sociological problems, God knows what's in the biosphere, if there even is a biosphere in Mars. There was at one time.
How is it going to affect? It's going to change our way of thinking, how we treat each other, especially in those areas.
Well, particularly if you're Martian or Martian, and you can't even conceive of coming to Earth because you can weigh twice as much. Yeah, and you also can weigh twice as much. And you can imagine weighing twice as much as you now, trying to walk around thinking, oh, great, Venice is wonderful.
Yeah. It's sure a lot of fun.
While your blood pressure is on you, it's on higher. Combine that with your respiration speed and your heart rate beat.
My heart is the whole time. In that I always just open up the goes on. It's why I try to tell you how to go. You want to be in court. You won't give me in court. Whenever I do it, it goes on. I've been trying to skip this. Yeah. It won't. You know, you do it. As long as I'm calm, it's fine. But when I think it goes on. I have to be able to get myself. I have to. I know that.
I totally understand. I have to be able to do it for myself. I have to be able to prove to myself that I can make mistakes. That I can figure it out.
Yes, on my own.
Okay. But you and I both know how things went into themselves to work better when we work together. Okay? So please let us,
I'll let you know.
please let us, okay?
I'll do it.
And right now, what I need you to do so that I can is to sit here with me and talk with you, get your heart rate a little bit, and get you calm down.
I don't know whether to come down or not down or not.
Okay, I understand that's why we're here. I'm simply talking to you. So we don't know if this was an anxiety attack.
Yes, it was an anxiety.
Anxiety attack, and you know that sitting here.
Yes.
Hello. Your heart rate.
Do you think it would help if we moved into this empty panel room that way and finish this? Okay.
Moving. She's got 2 steps before she gonna go straight into the last time she tries to stay with that.
Alright, and make sure that you get her food too.
I will get that in a moment. Okay, we're just, I know,
I'm here just in case.
I've got no pressure on you. What all is hers?
No, it didn't. Cool.